Hello, Chess.com listeners. This is International Master Mark Ginsburg with another segment of Judgment and Planning. Today we're going to do an exciting variation, the dragon, and learn it in a rather deep manner using a set of recent games as example material. But more importantly, we're going to understand the ideas behind the variation. In the particular line we're going to look at, it's a very positional and thematic way to play for white. So we're going to learn a very specific dragon line and understand it inside out. Let's play the first few moves of a conventional Sicilian dragon, which has seen a lot of press recently. Even Ivanchuk tried it in a recent game against Catronius. Although Catronius stood much better, Catronius mishandled it and went on to lose. Let's see how white can play in this line. These are all typical dragon moves. White plays bishop e3, setting up a Yugoslav attack formation. And we reach a position familiar probably to most of you. And in this position, there's a branching. In many cases, white will go bishop to c4. There's a debate about that move. It puts the bishop on an aggressive diagonal against black's king. On the other hand, it's exposed on c4 and it's exposed on b3. The question is, can black make use of that? In many games recently, white has chosen to avoid that question and simply to castle long. That's what we're going to talk about today. In this position, there are many long lines starting with the move d5. However, black has another way to play, which has been seen quite a bit. And the other way to play is to take on d4, and after white takes back, black puts his bishop on e6. This is the line that we want to look at rather deeply in this segment. I was playing in the Berkeley International in January, and I noticed Grandmaster Robert Hess had this as white against Keaton Kiriwa, and Hess chose the move h4, which would not be my choice. It's not a bad move, but it allowed some strange complications. Kiriwa was allowed to put his queen out to a5, and Hess followed up with queen g5, which is theory, but it becomes a little messy when black offers a typical pawn sacrifice. If white captures the pawn, black will bring his queen back, and the rooks and the queen will bother white's king. This was seen in my last segment, if you remember, against Dean Hergott. I offered a similar sacrifice to open lines against the king. In this particular position, after h5, rook a b8, it just became a big mess, and actually Kiriwa went on to win the game. That doesn't mean Hess's opening was bad, but I think white has better. Let's go back a little bit. Instead of h4, it's more clear to me and more thematic to play king to b1, which actually prevents queen to a5, which would be a blunder due to knight d5. The queens are now opposed, and if black takes the queen, it's not check, and white can throw in the knight takes pawn check first. So queen to a5 is not happening. Instead, in this position, black typically moves queen to c7. And now we're going to get into some interesting theory. After queen to c7, I think the best move here is to play knight to d5, and black takes, and white takes. And now we reach an unbalanced position. White has the two bishops, but black hopes to advance gradually on the queen side with his pawns, and he has an alternate idea. The alternate idea is to reach an ending. Let's say the knight moves away somewhere, and let's say the bishops came off. If magically the queens were to come off too, black could play with a superior knight against a bishop in a semi-closed position. So that's black's alternate idea, is to reach a superior minor piece formation. So let's see what happens. White has just taken here on d5, and black plays oftentimes rook fc8. This happened actually in another Kira game, in a game I witnessed where Robbie Adamson was white in a US chess league. This position actually is quite nice for white. Let's see what happened. Rook fc8. Now the best move for white is rook to c1, which Adamson found. Black cannot take on d5, of course, because after bishop takes g7, the knight is falling. So that's untakeable. In this particular position, Kira felt it was the right time to go ahead with the bishop exchange. I should add that in this position, the rook to c1 move, I investigated that move quite a while ago, and I played against Grandmaster Kudrin, and black didn't really find many avenues of counterplay, and in the Kudrin game, he wound up playing e6 at some moment. But after this kind of position, white's bishop is going to be very dominating against the hanging center pawns. In this kind of position, I think white is just clearly better. If black ever advanced that e-pawn, he would just be left with white square weaknesses. In fact, the position was so good for white that a short while later I noticed in ChessBase that Kudrin started playing this way as white. So the rook to c1 move reached the highest level of approval because the dragon specialist Kudrin started playing it as white against the dragon. So that indeed is a testimonial for the strength of rook c1. Rook c1 stops the counterplay on the c-file, and it prepares c4 in some positions. That was a digression. Let's go back to the Adamson-Kira game. In that particular game, knight d7 was played. That's a seriously bad move. Adamson reacted the right way for a while. He took on g7. Notice how short of defenders the black king is. Black cannot organize an exchange of queens, and white is going to be fast on the king side with an attack. But we have to be accurate. We start with the obvious h4, as Adamson played. Kira had to stop the further advance of the h-pawn with h5. Adamson found g4, which is a natural move at trying to break things open, and Kira played the forced knight f6. Now let's look at this for a moment. This is a very important moment because Adamson started to go wrong here, and actually he eventually lost the game. However, this position is extremely good for white. Let's take a moment. The question is, should he break open black's king with gh, or should he play for some kind of pawn roller with g5? So let's look. Knight f6. What do we do for white? Well, in the game, Adamson guessed wrongly. He took on h5, which is not the right move. And now black indeed has a defensive formation after knight h5, bishop h3 hitting the rook, and now the rook shifts to a defensive location on h8. That's a problem because now black is starting to gain defensive resources. That's unfortunate because white had such a good position. In that game, after bishop g4, queen c4, black is eyeing the f4 square, and he has some counter chances. He indeed went on to win the game. But if we understand the right move for white, we're going to understand the strength of white's position. We have this position, and actually g5 is extremely strong. Let's see why. Knight d7. Black clearly wants his knight to relocate to the e5 square where it's active, and we simply prevent it with f4. White actually has a gigantic bind in this position. Furthermore, it's easy to play for white. Let's see a couple of more moves as an example. Black tries to get his knight active. We prevent it with c4. Black plays his rook back to f8 to add defenses to the king. And now we put the bishop on an active square. We're starting to line up on the f5 break, but we don't need it yet because black has no counterplay. Black tries to reroute the knight, maybe to c5 or somewhere, but white can just play rook to e1. rook he1, hitting the e7 point, rook a e8, guarding, and now we start to break the position down with queen c3 check, king h7. Now let's take a moment. How do we improve the position? We don't want to rush with f5 too soon because we don't want the knight to jump in with a defensive chance. So how do we do it? King h7. How do we break down black's position here? It's actually very instructive. What we do is we notice that the bishop has free reign of the board in this open position, so we make an extremely strong regrouping. We put it back to c2. The purpose of that is to shift it later to a4, and in some positions we get rid of the knight and then we execute the pawn roller, but we have a secondary idea too. It's actually very interesting. Let's say black plays a6, we play queen to d3, we're starting to line up on him. He gets his king out of the way, and now we put him in a bind with the rook e6 clearance. This threatens rook takes g6 and mate. Black defends the mate with rook h8, so there's no more mate, but white is still getting black in a bind. He can double the rooks. Black can't consider taking the white rook, so it's getting really grim. Let's say he defends g6 with knight f8, and after that crawling retreat, we can just bring the front rook back to e3, and black is almost in total zugzwang. That was a really nice maneuver of the bishop from f1 to d3 to c2 with multi-purpose ideas. One idea to line up against g6, and the other idea to swing out to a4. This happens in other Sicilians too. Concluding this position is completely crushing for white. Let's see a few more moves. Rooks came back to e3. Let's say he defends rook g8, nothing really to do. Queen check, king h7, and now the thematic bishop to a4, and black collapses because the e7 point is falling. That was really a very nice geometrical position, and it illustrated all of white's ideas in one go. Hopefully you enjoyed that sequence of moves. It all started when black made the mistake and exchanged the bishops too soon. Let's go back to that start position and just realize what white should have done to reiterate what we learned. We had this position. Adamson made the wrong choice of gh, but with g5, it would have been crushing. This position is completely crushing, and white should win it, as we saw. Let me talk about one other game I had with this. I had a game with international master Jan van der Mortel, who also played in the U.S. Chess League. And van der Mortel played better for black than this. This knight g7 move is a big lemon. So we had this position, and in the van der Mortel game, let's see what he did. Rook fc8 as the Adamson game, rook c1 as in the Adamson-Kira game. And now van der Mortel played queen to d7, and this move is stronger than Kira's lemon. Kira played this big lemon knight d7, and we saw that was very weak. Queen d7 is much stronger. It prepares b5. If white's pawn came to c4, the b5 would break up that pawn chain. It also has a secondary idea of maybe coming out to f5 with the queen to hit d5. Even so, white can keep an advantage. I played g4 to stop any queen f5 ideas. He played his pre-programmed b5 move, which is theory, but white stands better here. White stakes his claim in the center with c4. Black redirects his queen to the b file. White carries on with the kingside attack. Black tries to open lines, bc, bishop c4. The d5 pawn is never takeable because there's an x-ray attack after bishop g7 and the knight falls. So he can't take on d5. He wound up playing rook to c7 to prepare a rook doubling. However, this is an important position. Let's see what white can do. It's very nice when white can both attack and defend. And in this position, there is such a thing. I can play b3, supporting the bishop, and after he goes ahead with the doubling, threatening my bishop, I just unpin with queen b2, and that intensifies the pressure on his king side. So black has problems on the diagonal. White's breaking anyway with h5. White has the bishop pair, although this bishop looks a little bit stupid. It holds things together. And black has a very tough time dealing with white's attack because he has no open lines to white's king, and the rook on c1 is very useful. So white stands better here. That game concluded when black made a bad mistake. In this particular position, he made a very bad mistake that Kira made also. He played h5, and black cannot open the king like this. This move loses, and white doesn't have to find very difficult moves to beat it. The h5 move was played. White just took. Black took with the knight. White's very happy to get rid of the defending bishop. And as you might have guessed, h5 leaves black with a hopeless position because things are happening too fast near his king, and his pieces are totally bottled up. In the game, he played a desperation sacrifice of rook takes c4 to try to make an ending when all the rooks come off. I took, he took, and now I prolonged matters unnecessarily by taking the rook back, and then black reaches an ending and the h5 pawn falls. If I had thought even a little bit, I would find h6, and black has no checks to bother white, and he can't move his knight somewhere like here because of h7 and queens. So he's got to put it somewhere like h5. And now after I take, he has nothing better than to trade the queens. And if he tries to round up my pawn with his king, I can round up his e-pawn with my rook. And that's all the difference because white wins easily. So h6 for me here wins quite easily. I prolonged the game unnecessarily. But if we go back to the very beginning, I just want to reiterate what we learned. The whole variation, I believe, is good for white based on the fact that the rook c1 move so effectively shuts him down. Black's main ideas that occurred in the Hess game were revolving around black's queen already being active out on a5. But white's early knight d5 shut that off. He can't do that. And all that happens to black here is that his rooks and his queen are sort of huddled uselessly, and white has a large advantage in board space. He has the bishop pair. The d-pawn is never takeable. And I think we saw how knight d7 turned out very badly in the Adamson-Kira game, although black did win that game when white went wrong. The main thing you should be studying from this is what to do after knight d7 because it's extremely thematic. And also as a secondary study, you should learn what to do after the superior queen d7, which Vandermortel played, which I also think is good for white. The conclusion of all this, in a larger sense, is that I don't really believe in this method of play for black, taking on d4. I believe that d5, for better or worse, is black's best try. Lines are now running 30 or 35 moves deep. There's been a lot of interest in this line. And it still seems to be black's best shot. The more passive continuation, knight d4, bishop e6, is only passive if white reacts with the ultra-accurate king b1, queen c7, knight d5, which shuts black off on the queen side, as we saw, and prepares the slow motion h4, g4, h5, as well as the rook c1 prophylactic maneuver, which prepares c4. White combines all these ideas together and gradually squeezes black, and if black opposes the bishops, we see how white gains a tremendous attack. So for material to study, we have Hess Kira from Berkeley International, we have Adamson Kira from US Chess League, and my game against Vandermortel also from US Chess League. So these games are all online, which you can look at, and it will really help your chess if you try to play it as white and find someone to play it as black against you as a practice, because I believe this position fundamentally is quite nice for white. So thank you very much for listening. This was episode number 2, and we'll get to you with episode number 3 shortly.